seen communities and how we can come together, how we've experienced pockets of the future that we're building, then I know that like it is possible. And that's essentially what the climate justice movement is about. That's where the passion comes from, like this excitement that like it is possible, it's here.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Bigger, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. In this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Mitzi Jonelle Tan, a full-time climate justice activist. She's a convener and international spokesperson of the Youth Advocates on Climate Action Philippines, a nationwide alliance of Filipino youth organizations, student councils, and individuals fighting against climate change and pursuing climate justice. Mitzi, welcome to the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights, your experience, your passion with us. And as a starting point, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and a little about the mission that you're on.
I'm Mitzi Jonelle Tan. I'm a full-time climate justice activist with Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, or YACAP. I am one of the conveners, or like one of the co-founders, also the international spokesperson. And that means I also do some international work with groups like the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the Fridays for Future, or the Youth Climate Justice Fund. So it's basically this range of campaigning, organizing, and raising awareness, and opening doors, and training, and all these different things.
What is a climate justice activist, and what is it that you're trying to solve?
So climate justice is essentially ensuring that the ones who are most responsible and least vulnerable really do their job to really address the crisis that they caused, so that the ones who are most vulnerable and least responsible don't get left behind. It's understanding that all socioeconomic problems that we're experiencing today, they are amplified by and they also amplify the climate crisis. And so you talk about climate justice, it's really essentially at its core building a world where everyone feels safe, and the most marginalized especially are not left behind.
So let's talk about YACAP then. Give us an introduction to the organization itself and the work that it's trying to do.
So YACAP, or Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, is an alliance that was started in 2019 of youth individuals, but also youth organizations, student councils, student groups, etc. So we have 5 points of unity: urgency of climate action, climate justice, youth-led collective action, the defense of environmental defenders, and then the last is systemic change, or system change. Now, a lot of our focus is going to urban poor communities, coastal communities, farming communities, and creating climate modules that's contextualized to their experience. But also when we go there, we bring our students and we learn from them. We learn from the frontline communities, because there is so much for us to learn from them already, simply because they see the changes of the climate like a lot more directly. They have already been forced to adapt on their own without systemic or structural support. And so there are also a lot of innovative solutions that you can actually get from that. And also learning about the specificities of the climate crisis in these communities and how it changes every single time. It helps us then create the module that's really contextualized and fit for their experience, for how they have seen the climate crisis.
What's the goal then? Is the goal to just educate? Is it to empower and give tools? Is it to elevate their voice? Like, what's the output that you're hoping for after you've gone and worked with these youth, or you've come together?
It starts with educating, and that empowers them. And it's also ensuring that we're able to mobilize them as well. So during extreme weather events and super typhoons especially, which is what the Philippines is affected by the most, we launch into relief operations, we do donations, and then we go on ground if there are members in the vicinity. And then we also hold campaigns that are targeting institutions sometimes, or targeting government agencies to change policies. And then we also do some lobbying work with Congress people. So it's a range.
When did this become your mission, or when did you say, like, I want to make climate justice, the climate crisis, my career?
It was in 2017, so I had 2 years left in university at that point. I was part of the university student council, and every year before the pandemic, our indigenous peoples would go from the rural areas into the mountains to the city, and to have their voices heard, because there's no media that's happening in these areas, right? And so I was able to talk to a Lumad indigenous leader, and he was telling us about how they were being harassed and displaced and militarized. And it was also like dire and like big. And then he kind of chuckled. He's like, yeah, that's why you have no choice but to fight back. And he's like, he looks around. He's like, what's for lunch? At that point, I was just like, it's really simple. You just there's no choice but to fight back. And
Mm.
it all clicked for me, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And then I actively educated myself on the Paris Agreement, on what's happening, everything, et cetera, et cetera. And then I realized that, oh, okay, it's the climate crisis that we really need to hone down on.
And I guess, okay, you mentioned that you got a little bit educated, but what were your next steps into figuring out what were you doing with the next 2 years? Were you joining clubs? Were you taking different classes? How did you then get ready to make that jump that you were going to make?
So first I did my own research, like
Yeah.
immediately. I was like, okay, what am I doing? What's happening? And then I started like switching. I started like slowly switching like things that I could do. And I started joining student-based organizations. In 2017 was also the year that Donald Trump said that climate change wasn't real. And so scientists in the US started this group called March for Science.
Mm.
Uh, and they called on scientists across the world to do these marches for climate justice. And
Yeah.
so in 2017, I was starting to join actions like that. In 2018, I started helping to organize those, in 2019 as well. And then in 2019, that's when we realized that we needed something beyond just like science youth or like scientists,
Mm.
but a youth group as well, because a lot of people were trying to ask us like, hey, how do we we were like, okay, we need to fill the gap that is clearly here because people are looking to us for it.
Yeah. And who was we? Who came together? And does that make you an entrepreneur, or did you join an organization and have a job then at that point? Because it sounds like you were already, an activist and you're already kind of leading clubs, but when you all merged together, was it an entrepreneurial effort and one person comes together, blah blah blah, or did you all just come together as a community and just you're working it out as you go along?
It's definitely the latter. In 2019, two of the youth organizations that would work together a lot. So Agam Youth, which is Science for the People, and then Sari Buhay, which means biodiversity. We came together and we were like, okay, so let's start this. Let's look for other youth organizations who want to start this with us, and let's
Okay.
look for people who want to like start the leadership of it. But it was rocky. Like there were a handful of organizations. It was good, but then the people, you can have an alliance, but you need people who will actually monitor the alliance. All of these things, and I think I was just fresh out of school. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. It was in a way kind of not that well planned out for me. Um,
Mm.
in the sense that I knew that this is what I wanted to do, but then I didn't know how I was going to reconcile that with work also and with like finances. And so I did decide like so we graduated in the middle of the year, right? So the rest of 2019, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take half a year off or a year off and work on this because this is something that I really care about, and then I'll figure it out, whatever. Let's maybe I'll do like an NGO and then do this, yeah, the same, whatever. And then 2020 was the pandemic. And so no one was accepting jobs really. And you couldn't really like look for it. And I wasn't really motivated to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And 2020 was also the year that the international youth movement actually really came together. So before that, people weren't really talking to each other. But then now that there were no reasons not to do things together, we just started doing things together.
Yeah.
And then we also like expanded our support in the Philippines as well at that same time because everyone was coming together. And so it became this moment where the community really did come together and we started planning things out a little bit more. And then things got a little bit more hammered down over the years. And then but it was a while before it got here and it wasn't exactly like super planned out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in a sense, but not necessarily like my place in it specifically, because I was like, maybe it's a student thing and once I graduate, then we find the next student
Right.
to come. I was like, let me just have this half year, 1 year to set things up for people. I
It
found,
happens like that. It
yeah.
happens like so. You mentioned that you weren't quite sure at the time how you could make it work, and then was it work, and could you make it financially work? Would you have taken their job? You're now 3.5 years past that point. Have you made it work? Do you have another job? Did it financially work out, or did you actually through those 2.5, 3 years just not worry about the money? You just worried about the mission.
Surprisingly, youth and climate, there are a lot of opportunities for youth climate groups. And
Mm.
so we started going into that more and more. And then I also started writing a lot, which
Okay.
does also, so it's like it's not it is like an activist's work, but it's not necessarily tied to YACAP. So a lot
Yeah.
of my writing and a lot of like these side things would also like generate like extra financial security. But yeah, I found out that I was in a place where I could do like what I wanted to keep doing and find support for that. And then I found other people who are also like really interested in doing that. So last year, there's this group called the Youth Climate Justice Fund. It's new, and I'm part of the steering committee. And what we do basically, it's a global group that just it talks to philanthropists and grants and funding and tries to make sure that funding gets to groups that don't usually have access to funding, because the money is sometimes there or it is available. Just a lot of
Yeah.
people don't know that it's a possibility to even like access these funds, because they're like, oh, we're a student group, like who wants to, but there is a lot of opportunities there if you know that you can look and how to look and where to look. And it's a lot of it is just having doors open for you.
You've learned how to find money. You've learned how to fill a lot of student positions. So you've actually learned quite a bit over this time. And I'm wondering, what are the foundational pieces you think that you've grabbed along in the last 2 to 3 years?
I think it's really important to understand who you're talking to.
Mhm.
So this means if you're talking to a politician or to a global north world leader or to a student or a farmer or a funder,
Yeah.
your language has to adjust so much but making sure that your message doesn't change, right? That you don't compromise yourself and your values, but then the way you communicate it has to change so much. That's one. I think another one is understanding that, and it's a mix of like personal growth, in the sense that I had a lot of climate anxiety and a lot of like, oh, I have to make sure that I'm constantly on this, because the climate crisis is horrible, like it's all on us. And I always talk about collective action, but really to believe collective action means that you understand that you also need to let go of like the guilt within you if you want to take a break, right? I think that's so important to talk about with young people. I mean, there are a lot of other lessons that I learned, but this is something that the beauty ideally with a climate justice collective and understanding really with collective action means that you understand that resting means it's part of the collective work, that
Yeah.
you take a break, because if the earth has seasons, then you do too. Like there are seasons when the plants aren't growing, you just
Yeah.
stay still for a while, and that just means that you're gathering nutrients so that you can keep growing, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's so important in understanding. And there are also other like more practical things. Like I really learned how to be really good at like tracking things with Excel sheets, and like I'm great at like creating agendas and meetings now, and they're really efficient, like all these things. But I think those are some of the understanding that communication aspect and really understanding that you have a community with you and you can take a break. I think those are two things that I can take with me wherever I go.
What about organizing people? What have you learned about engaging people to get them on the mission or finding out their mission, particularly with students who are full of emotion and passion, and sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down? Like, what have you learned about managing people along this time?
It's still the same thing. It's communication
Mm.
and really understanding how to talk to them and talk to them about what resonates with them. If what resonates, like a question that's so easy to get this with and to like really grasp where people are coming from is either like what brought you to the issue of the climate crisis, or why did you want to join. Then you immediately know like, oh, this is what matters to them, like this is what they looked for, or this is what they saw, and that's why they were like, okay, I want to do this. And then it's also the seasons, right? Like there are seasons in students where it's exam season, so if you put an event there, 100% no one's gonna come, and you can't get mad
Right.
at them for it, because like you're organizing students, so so. And it's not just with students, also with people in their lives. So it's understanding that if you are able to create this collective space, then people also feel safe enough to say, hey, this is when I am available, this is how much I can give at this time. And so
Yeah.
it's really understanding that, but that's not to say that there are no challenges, right? Because
Mhm.
but also constantly like ensuring that you're keeping up with the way that they communicate and what
Yeah.
feels relevant to them. And so it's finding that balance and also always going to where they are already.
You're doing a lot of work, and it reminds me a lot of when I was starting my own charities. I started after my MBA. I was 27, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of starting something on the side of my job, and early on, passion was a big piece of that. Like we really believed in the mission. And I'm curious, What's the role of passion in your job? How important is it that the work you're doing is aligned to that passion?
To me, I feel like passion is so incredibly important because I feel like it's tied to hope almost. Like if passion was a candle, hope will always be the match that lights it, or like that keeps that little tiny flame there. Passion is almost like an after effect of hope. It's like because I feel the hope so much, because I've seen communities and how we can come together, how we've experienced pockets of the future that we're building already in the
Mm,
present, then I know that like it is possible. Like I feel safe in this space. And that's essentially what the climate justice movement is about. Like, and so
yeah.
that's where the passion comes from, like this excitement that like it is possible, it's here. But there are definitely dips, like as you said, like with the last COP. I think there's a picture going around of me like just crying. Like it was on the last day and I was just hugging my friends. We were just like bawling our eyes out because we were
Mm,
just tired, like
yeah.
we did all of this. We were promised so much. And then they're like, this is the best that we could have did. This is the best we've gotten so far. And like, this is the best you've gotten so far. Like, that's great. But also like, this is the best.
How do you take it when someone says this is the best? Just accept it.
I don't accept that. Like I recognize how people will say that so that they don't feel completely like, oh, all the work that I did was like horrible. I think we're able to hold both, right? We're able to
Yeah.
hold both the joy of like and the congratulations and the victory of like this is only possible at this
Mm,
point because of movement and because of civil society, because of scientists, because of businesses who are doing better, like smaller businesses, etc.
yeah.
But also world leaders, they gotta step up, they gotta do more, right? You can hold both in both spaces. And again, it's about understanding the communication aspect. Like, who am I talking to right now? If I'm talking to like just a group of activists in a closed door room, I will just say like, this is great, but
Yeah.
we need to do more. If I'm talking to like media or like world leader, I can't be like, you did great, right? Like, I'm not gonna congratulate them for the bare minimum.
You're really good at turning, let's just say, challenge or anxiety, big picture challenges, problems into something hopeful or finding that silver lining. And I'm curious, how do you do that? Do you reflect on what's going well? Do you try and remove the emotions of the moment? Like, what's your
Mm.
process for getting through those challenging times and finding that candle that you were mentioning, like finding that little remaining flame and just focusing on that?
When I was starting out, it was this thing in me that I was like, I have to constantly be a light, right? Like I have to constantly have this flame. It has to be a steady flame, and that's not how flames work. I realized that I did not feel the emotions, and so there was one moment when there was a report, I think, that came out that 1.5 degrees Celsius might not be possible anymore. But it's one of those scientific reports that come out every so often.
Mhm.
And that was just after the 5 years of the Paris Agreement. And we just did this global campaign on Fight for 1.5 and listen to the science. And then suddenly, like a few months later, oh, wait, the science says it's not possible. And I was just, I lost it. Like I was so sad and I was crying so much. And a friend told me it's such good advice. Like, just grieve.
Mm,
There is something to grieve here. There is a future that you feel like you've lost. There's a present that you feel that is threatened. And there is something to grieve there. And that process of someone, of a community member telling me that I can grieve
yeah,
was what gave me that light again, because I grieved and then I was held by people and I realized it is possible. Because look at us,
yeah,
like look at us coming together as people, as humanity, really pushing and really believing in this, and all of us feeling the same way. That's where a lot of my hope comes from then. But because I have hope, I'm like, no, I can't give up. Even if,
yeah.
sometimes I'm miserable and I'm like, I
Mm,
want to give up, but I know that there's such a great place to be that we could all be in, that I
yeah.
can't give it up almost. And it is this process. And there are dips, and sometimes the dips aren't just like hours, sometimes the dips are days and weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes you're just like not even like all the way there, not low, but I think it's almost worse when you're just in the middle and you're just like, I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna flow around. I almost went full circle where it was before I was like, no, I'm always lit up. I'm never gonna grieve. And then because I grieved, now I am lit up more.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So if you were to carry that flame forward, where do you see yourself next 3, 5, 10 years? Where do you see yourself? Where do you see your work? You take all this experience forward and you want to focus it. Where do you see yourself doing that?
And it's a very good question. It's the new year, so it's like the time when you reflect on all these things, and I'm like, what am I gonna do in my life? I don't know yet, and I find that I'm okay with that. I used to be like a over planner, and I
Mhm.
still overthink quite a lot, but I know deep down that I want to keep doing like collective action and campaigning. I know I am good at campaigning and
Okay.
organizing. There's so many possibilities and opportunities that are around us that I didn't even know were there. And if I
Mhm.
focus on like, this is my one thing right now, I might miss out on all the other possibilities that are there. So
Mhm.
I think it's a lot about being open, knowing which direction to take. So it is still staying within the same field and slowly transitioning out of the youth movement. Right now, a lot of what I'm doing actually is training the younger generation. So not as much as like where that leads me next, I'm not sure. I know, I'm pretty sure, and if this comes out like later and it bites me in the ass, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna be a politician. I don't think that's for me. I think it's just a whole different like circus playing
Mhm.
field that I didn't play. But it's definitely still gonna be like in the organizing campaigning world of for around climate justice.
Well, do you have any mentors? Do you have advisors that help you with that 10-year vision for yourself? Like, have you found those people? And
Not 10 years. I mean, I think they're there if I ask. I think
Mhm.
I'm also just like not ready to start asking these questions. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to look at that yet. But it's like on the back end of my mind. I'm like, I do really, really enjoy communication, like you said. And I think
Mm.
media is also really, really crucial and important. Like the way exactly the way you said it. So I'm really grateful for that. So I'm like, but that a lot of people also criticize me. You're like, oh, how much can you do with just that? So I'm actually surprised because I thought a lot of people who I talk to who have been in the corporate world will be like, oh, corporate is like scale wise. I'm like, you also move so slowly, also. So I'm like, is it
Yeah.
really the place? But
Now, if you were to give some advice to an aspiring activist, the youth that you consider to be younger, aspiring activist, young or old, who is looking to follow in your own footsteps, what are two or three pieces of advice you give them as they're looking to make either a jump into or jump over to activism?
the first is not to overthink it and think that I have to know a certain level of information or be a certain type of way before I can start. The second, I think, would be to find a group or find people that you can do this with. There are so many groups that already exist. You can start like where you're comfortable with and really understanding that there is a role for you to play in every single movement. If there's something that you already enjoy doing, you can just keep doing that, but then realign it into climate, right? Like you don't even have to switch professions. You can just bring in climate into that, and it actually reaches a whole different echo chamber that we wouldn't reach. So it's good that we're reaching you. You don't have to jump out of your circle.